Alright guys, Imola is on this weekend, but instead of looking forward to this weekend race, I want to look back, way back, all the way back to 1985, the 1985 San Marino Grand Prix, which was also held at the Imola circuit in Italy. And why am I highlighting this one? Well, this race is without doubt one of the most bizarre, one of the most incredible, just downright ludicrous races I have ever seen in Formula One history. Now, I've spoke before about how I've watched pretty much every single Formula One Grand Prix going all the way back to like 1978 or whenever the BBC started to regularly broadcast them live. I spent thousands of hours going through the old BBC archives. Long before F1 TV was a thing, I was looking up these races, learning about Formula One history. And the 1985 San Marino Grand Prix is without a doubt one of the most bonkers I have ever seen. But why is that? Well, this race is very much known as the day that everybody ran out of fuel. And I do mean pretty much everybody ran out of fuel in this one. This was absolutely crazy. So you might be wondering how that happened. Well, I'll get into why that did happen, but first let's set the scene. Let's look back. Let's wind the clock back 40 years. Like I said, you know, San Marino used to be a Grand Prix on the calendar from 81 to 2006. It was held at Imola every single time, and like I said, this track is magical. It is the home of the Tifosi. That's why I'm wearing the Ferrari shirt, guys. That's why I'm repping the Ferrari merch for this one, because this is a proper Ferrari home race. I mean, yes, Monza is important, of course, in Italy, but this is right in the heartland of Ferrari. This is so close to their base, their headquarters in Maranello. Like I said, Imola has hosted so many classic Grand Prix over the years. 2005 is another classic one. I may cover that in future years, but that's what everybody focuses on. Everybody focuses on that battle between Michael Schumacher and Fernando Alonso, and not without good reason. It's one of the best battles in F1 history in the 21st century. Without a doubt, it's got to be up there. But like I said, 85 is one that a lot of people won't focus on because it was so long ago, long before I was even thought about in truth, but I still want to cover it. I still think it's an important part of F1 history. It does shape a lot of things that we see today, because we never saw scenes like this again, or at least on this kind of scale, because basically we didn't want to see another repeat of this, and I'll go into why exactly that is. So the San Marino Grand Prix was the traditional start of the European leg of the Formula One season, much like the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix has been in recent years as well. However, this was round 3 of the season, and in the previous round in Portugal, Ayrton Senna dominated the torrential rain conditions at Estoril to take his first of what would eventually become 41 victories in Formula One. Most of this race in San Marino was not the most eventful, to be perfectly honest, although we did see a retirement pretty early on for Ferrari's Michele Alboreto on 29 of 60 laps. This was due to an electrical failure, and coming into this round, Alboreto was leading the championship after the first 2 rounds, so it was wide open for somebody else to be able to take charge of that. And Senna was the heavy favourite to do so. He led from pole position from the start in his Lotus and looked to be sailing to his second Grand Prix in as many races. And a lot of people thinking, really, this kid is going to be a world champion. They already thought that after 84, after his Monaco drive there, of course, but this guy would have been in an incredible position at that point and would have took the world championship lead had he actually won this race. But unfortunately for him, it didn't happen because he ran out of fuel with 4 laps remaining. He only completed 56 of 60 laps, but he ran out of fuel going through the Ravazzas near the end of the lap, and unfortunately he was then sitting up for Stefan Johansson, who took the lead in his Ferrari. Now the Tifosi went absolutely insane over that. They went into raptures over that. Of course, Ferrari leading a race. Yeah, incredible scenes to see Johansson leading the race in only his second race for Ferrari. Now, Johansson was only driving in his second race for Ferrari. He ended up replacing René Arnoux after the opening round of the season, where of course Johansson actually started the season for Tyrrell. Now, in the previous seasons before this, he was kind of a bit part super sub kind of character, a bit like a Nico Hülkenberg of the 1980s, being parachuted into the likes of Tolman and Tyrrell when other drivers were dropping out of those teams. And he did a standout job in fairness, particularly in 1984 for Tolman, where he managed to get a 4th place at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. That earned him a full-time drive for Tyrrell in 1984, but he only lasted one race before getting the call up to Ferrari, and I don't blame him for saying C to Enzo Ferrari because of that. Who would turn that down at the end of the day? The chance to drive for Ferrari is, of course, pretty much every Formula One driver's dream, whether they want to admit it or not. Now, Johansson had a really eventful race. He actually started all the way down in 15th on the grid. He had a pretty poor qualifying, if I'm being totally honest, but thanks to some excellent pace and just keeping his nose clean, he ended up getting all the way up to first by lap 56. And let's not forget, he's actually leading the race at this point in a Ferrari, at Ferrari's proper home race at Imola. He's never even stood on the podium before in Formula One. How excited must he have felt in the cockpit of that car? He must have been absolutely on cloud 9 at that point. However, though, it was not to last because he too ran out of fuel just over a lap later. Absolutely agonizing scenes for the Tifosi. But despite all that, Johansson actually left the race with a smile on his face as he walked into the pits after his car had been abandoned for running out of fuel. He was smiling at least, which is something, but I really do think the pain that must have been going through his system at that point, he must have felt that he was destined to win a Formula One Grand Prix at that point, but unfortunately, somehow Johansson never actually managed to win. He drove for the likes of Ferrari, he drove for the likes of McLaren, he had many second places, many third places later on in his career, but he never actually managed to win a race, and I think he has to really go down as one of the best drivers to never win a Formula One Grand Prix, but that's very much debatable. But who took the lead from Johansson? Well, it was none other than Le Professeur, Alain Prost himself, who snuck into the lead. Now, Prost was infamous for winning Grand Prix by the smallest possible margin, nursing his car across the line, doing just enough to take victory, using his brain, being very calculated. That's why they called him the Professor. So a lot of people at that point, including the commentator Murray Walker, was very much backing Alain Prost to cross the line in first position. And indeed, he did manage to do that. He very much nursed his car across the line really slowly on the final lap of the race. He was visible. You go back and watch the footage, which is available on YouTube. I wish I could show it you, but you know that Formula One would demonetize this video faster than you could say Autodromo Nazionale Enzo e Dino Ferrari, which is the full name of the Imola circuit. Only took 2 attempts to get that right. But yeah, I mean, Prost did cross the line in the lead. He did think that he won the race. He lifted the winner's trophy. He stood on the top step of the podium, but there was trouble ahead. Of course, he didn't manage to get all the way around his cool-down lap after that, and that was very much a sign that his car had run out of fuel, and he was disqualified. He was disqualified, and you can guess why. He was underweight. Why was he underweight? Because he didn't have enough fuel in the car. So Prost, unfortunately, was disqualified. It seemed as though he was going to take the lead of the World Championship because of that, but it didn't happen. So who managed to win? Who managed to win this Grand Prix? Well, it was one of the home drivers. It was Senna's teammate at Lotus, Elio De Angelis. He took his second and final Grand Prix victory at Imola. He didn't know it at the time, of course. He crossed the line in second place, but he won it fair and square in the end. And of course, he was one of the very few drivers to have enough fuel to actually complete the race and ensure that his car was not underweight. And incredibly, De Angelis actually led the championship after this, although Alain Prost was going to dominate this championship in 1985, taking his first of what was eventually 4 world titles in 85. Now, of course, this was a bit of a farcical situation for Formula One. Very entertaining and dramatic for the viewers, but it was very much adding fuel to the fire, for lack of a better term. That was genuinely not a pun I was going for there. But yeah, the likes of Nigel Mansell were very, very critical of Formula One at this point. They were saying that the fuel consumption regulations that FISA was putting in place, FISA being one of the governing bodies in Formula One. We'll talk about FISA and FOCA at some point. I'm sure I've mentioned them a few times. They had a very controversial race here in 1982 because of reasons similar to that as well. But yeah, the regulations apparently were very much limiting the drivers and forcing them to do economy runs rather than racing. And you know, Nigel Mansell's definitely a target for a lot of people, saying that he loves a moan, but I think he had a point with this one. I'll go through the full classification for this race at the end of this video, but it's absolutely farcical this happened. Now, we never saw events like this happen again, at least not on the same scale anyway. After this race, a lot of drivers, instead of doing a cool down lap after crossing the checkered flag, instead just pulled up straight away to make sure they had enough fuel in the car to be able to do it. You might think that Prost being about 2 kilograms underweight, you might think, well, really, is that a lap's worth of fuel? Nowadays, no, it's nowhere near that much. Cars are a lot more efficient when it comes to the fuel nowadays. But back in the mid-80s, that very much would have been probably less than a lap. They were probably burning about 2 or 3 kilograms easily per lap of fuel. And if you're running around saying it in kilograms rather than litres, Formula One does use weight rather than litres, which is basically an area of volume. That very much depends on of course, the temperature that it's in. A mass does stay the same for a liquid. I've explained this before when it comes to F1, but I just thought I'd do that as a little footnote for you guys wondering why I'm saying that. Why are you saying it in kilograms? Why not litres? Well, that is why, because of temperatures. It expands in hotter conditions and contracts in colder conditions. But yeah, like I said, Alain Prost, of course, went on to win 4 world championships. Ayrton Senna went on to win 3 of them. Elio De Angelis, unfortunately, he wasn't too much longer for this world. He passed away in 1986, the following year, while driving a test for Brabham. Very, very tragic accident at the Paul Ricard circuit, which of course hosted the French Grand Prix at that time and would later go on to host it many, many times in the future as well. But he was only 28 years of age as well. And De Angelis as well was, a really, I'll probably do a video about him at some point. Again, a really underrated driver, someone who was, kind of labelled as the last gentleman driver of Formula One. I believe he was a very skilled pianist as well. So yeah, really, real gentleman, a real loss to the Formula One community. But, a lot of people died during this time in Formula One. You go back through the annals of Formula One history, there's a lot of death and destruction there. It really, the kids these days don't know how lucky we have it in terms of these drivers surviving horrific accidents. Back then, you had a horrible accident. If you were lucky, it was a career ender, and if you were unlucky, then it would very much be your last time driving any kind of vehicle. So, but yeah, let's just talk about the actual order in the end for this one. So Thierry Boutsen ended up being in second place. He did stand on the podium for third position, but he was promoted up to second after Prost disqualification. But he too ran out of fuel. He actually had to push his car across the line to finish ahead of some of the drivers behind him, but he did not do the full race distance, so he ran out of fuel as well. Patrick Tambay completed the podium in third position. Defending world champion Niki Lauda was in fourth. Nigel Mansell, despite his complaints, was in fifth place. And after all of that, somehow Stefan Johansson got a point for sixth. Now, of course, the point system in Formula One during this time was different to what it was now. Instead of the top 10 scoring points, the top 6 scored points. Instead of the winner getting 25 points, back then they got 9 points back in the day, and it was on a sliding scale: 9, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1, down to 6th place. So different points back then. But if the points did go down to 10th, there'd be a bunch of other drivers that actually scored points for failing to finish the race as well, being several laps down. Ayrton Senna, he was classified in 7th, ran out of fuel. Nelson Piquet in 8th, ran out of fuel. 9th place, Martin Brundle, ran out of fuel. Derek Warwick, the final of the classified drivers in this one, he was in 10th. He didn't run out of fuel, but he was 4 laps down. I am willing to bet that if he attempted to do all 60 laps, he too would have ran out of fuel. So, incredibly, out of 10 drivers, let's include Prost in this as well, actually. Out of 11 drivers, if you include all of those that were classified, plus Alain Prost, the guy who actually thought he won the race, you've got Prost, who ran out of fuel, Boutsen ran out of fuel, Mansell, Johansson, Senna, Piquet, Brundle, all ran out of fuel. And only one of those guys finished on the lead lap. That was the winner, Elio De Angelis. Tambay was a lap down. Boutsen was effectively a lap down because he pushed his car across the line. Absolutely insane race. We will never see anything like this ever again. And in truth, we didn't see anything like this to this scale anyway in the remainder of 85 or any season after that. You might be wondering, well, how are these teams allowing their drivers to run out of fuel? In Senna's case, running out of fuel 4 laps before the finish. Well, there were a number of reasons why this happened. It was very much a perfect storm, really, in San Marino for allowing all these cars to run out of fuel way before the end of the race. So the first reason, and the simplest reason, is that the technology in Formula One during this time was extremely primitive compared to what it is now. Nowadays, of course, these cars have telemetry, so much data, so many different sensors being connected to these cars, being instantly streamed back to base, back to halfway around the world sometimes, where these actual teams are analyzing all this data. Back then, there was none of that. Absolutely none of that. It would never be, I mean, you know, drivers do have to conserve fuel nowadays, but they'll never run out of fuel with several laps to go. That almost never happens. It would only ever happen if there's another kind of mechanical failure, really, that would contribute towards that. Back then, in 1985, all these guys had was just a analog fuel gauge, just like you have in your car. In fact, a lot of people in their car now will have digital fuel gauges. Only if you've got an old car would you have an analog fuel gauge. That's all these guys had. That's it. They didn't have any other indication about how much fuel they actually had in their car. And a lot of the time, these analog fuel gauges were actually wrong. And it was very hard to read them as well. You have to realize that these guys were being thrown around 200 miles an hour. The cars were very, very stiff. The circuits were incredibly bumpy. Imola was a very fast track, and that was another reason why as well, but I'll go into more depth soon with that one. But you know, they're being shook around like this all the time. It's very hard to read a fuel gauge, especially when you've got the helmet on, the visor and everything. It would have been very difficult to actually read the thing. So that was a big reason why. And in fact, on top of that as well, Johansson, when he ran out of fuel, the real tragedy of Johansson in this one is that his car actually said that he had enough fuel to finish the race. But unfortunately, it was having a problem. There was actually an electrical problem with his car due to a crack in the turbo pipe. So basically a tiny amount of fuel must have leaked out, and yeah, they're just erroneously showing that, you know, the thing had enough fuel to actually finish the race, when in reality it didn't. So that's why he ran out of fuel. He wasn't being irresponsible. He genuinely thought he had enough, but it turns out, unfortunately, no, unfortunately he did not. The second reason why there's so many people actually ran out of fuel is because of the cars themselves. I'm not just talking about the lack of technology, I'm talking about just the nature of the beast. These things were animals back in the day. Now, you might think, oh, well, these were V6 turbos, that just like we have now in Formula 1. No, no, these were not like what we have now in Formula 1. I mean, I'll show you some pictures. I've shown you loads of pictures of cars from this era in 85 throughout this video. These do not look like Formula 1 cars nowadays. They had very primitive aerodynamics. It was basically all about power, you know, the turbocharged beast that these things were. The pressure that they used to run the turbochargers were absolutely insanity. So because of that as well, you had cars that used a lot more fuel. I mean, they'd use 2-3 times as much fuel as what cars would do nowadays. And this was also the days before refueling. I know we don't have refueling nowadays, but refueling wouldn't come back into Formula 1 until 1994, almost 10 years after this race. So you had to start the race with however much fuel you needed to finish the race. And a lot of times, these guys did actually miscalculate. It was very difficult. And the third really was because of the circuit itself. Now, nowadays, Formula 1, with its current calendar, you know, Imola is the worst track on the calendar, I should say, for fuel consumption overall. No track has higher fuel consumption rates currently on the calendar in 2025 than what Imola does. Now, albeit Imola's layout has changed a lot after Ayrton Senna's tragic death in 1994. The circuit was remodeled, the circuit got a lot more chicane, so that actually increased the fuel consumption rate. But even back in 1985, without the chicanes, this track was very, very heavy on fuel. It was really high speed. It wasn't actually too dissimilar in some senses to Monza, not quite on the same level with overall top speed, but there were a lot of long straights. I mean, for example, you'd actually run from near the Rivazza. There was a chicane shortly after the Rivazza before the pits back then. Now that's a straight, but there was no chicane at the Tamburello, where obviously Senna passed away. You know, that was basically a complete rundown all the way to what is now, I believe, the Villeneuve curve. Well, I think back then you'd probably have to lift for Tamburello, but you'd still be going in incredible speed as you head out of it. So there's a lot of reasons that contribute to this, and it's very much a perfect storm. And like I said, after this, we didn't quite see things on the same scale when it came to drivers running out of fuel, thankfully, because it was farcical, very entertaining as a one-off sort of thing, but overall, absolutely incredible this was allowed to happen. But yeah, a very in-depth look at what I believe is one of the most crazy races in Formula 1 history. You know, guys, let me know. Do you want me to do some more like this? I mean, I want to do one potentially before the Monaco Grand Prix next week about the 1982 race, where, again, lots of craziness happened there. But let me know. Would you like to see 82 for Monaco? Would you like to see 1996 for Monaco? Maybe a different race? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this. I put a lot of effort into it. Do go back and watch the final laps of this race if you can. They're on YouTube. if you're on F1 TV, you could probably watch the whole race, actually, for that matter. So do go check it out. Honestly, it's an absolute classic. And you got some Murray Walker and James Hunt commentary on there, which I could listen to them guys for hours and hours on end. And in fact, I have. I've done my time, like I've said many times on Formula One. I've watched so much footage from over the decades from it. And yeah, this race definitely stands out as one of my favorites that not a lot of people know. But yeah, your thoughts in the comments below, guys. Have a fantastic weekend. Let's hope for another classic 40 years on where people actually manage to finish the race without running out of fuel at Imola. So yeah, see you soon, guys. Like, share, comment, subscribe if you want to see more like this, and let me know in the comments if you want to see more videos like this as well. I really do enjoy making these longer form videos. Yeah, see you soon.